So that you know, this session is recorded and it will be posted on our website, hopefully by the end of the week is what we're aiming for, along with handouts from Nick and the PowerPoint from both Nick and David. Okay, all right, with no further ado, David, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share the screen here and start the slideshow. All right, so Jody, is this working properly? Everybody can see my first slide here? Okay, very good. Well, thank you for having me tonight. I've done this presentation with Nick like a couple, maybe 3 years ago now. And we find it to be very, informative for all involved. I encourage you to jot down your questions. I'm going to zip through this since, well, I'm not going to rush through it, but I'll probably get through this, in far less than an hour. I'm thinking a half hour, 40 minutes to leave time to answer your questions. So again, don't hesitate to get some questions down so that I can answer those. I do find that for people to ask questions and me to answer those, it helps the entire group. So tonight I'm going to talk about special needs planning, the estate planning for families with children with disabilities, for themselves, individuals that have disabilities, and the different types of trusts that can be used to preserve benefits, what those benefits are, some basics in benefit eligibility. And then I'll touch on stable accounts, but I'm going to leave much of that to Nick for him to talk about. And then I'm actually going to touch on some of the basics of guardianships. I think that, whether you're a parent of a minor and you're thinking about what happens when that minor turns 18, or a lot of times I get the same sort of questions about whether guardianship is appropriate, even if your loved one is well into adulthood. So I find it interesting, and I hope that it applies. Okay, so what are we talking about when we're talking about special needs, particularly the benefits? The benefits involved are this sort of alphabet soup of SSI, which is supplemental security income, SSD, which is Social Security disability insurance, and then regular Social Security retirement. Those are the income benefits provided through the Social Security Administration. And each one of them obviously has different sort of eligibility and availability requirements. On the healthcare perspective, or on the other side of the coin, is the healthcare benefits, and that's Medicaid, Medicare, and of course private insurance. Now, with all of these, again, Medicaid is the means tested benefit. It's kind of connected with SSI. Medicare is something that goes along when you retire and get your own Social Security or your Social Security disability. You can, if you have early retirement based on disability, you get Medicare. I'll go through that. And then, of course, there's private insurance. And, there are many times in the course of an individual's, sort of the continuum of special needs planning where an individual may be eligible for all three of these. They may have Medicaid that provides waiver services. They may have Medicare, due to the qualification through Social Security disability, and they may still then at that time be on either their own or their parents' private insurance. It's not uncommon, believe it or not, for all three of these to come into play. While I say it's not uncommon, it's not typical. Then we talk about some of the other things that kind of go along with public benefits, food stamps, food assistance, housing assistance. And then this last bullet I have here in all caps is verify. And what I mean by that is anytime that you're talking with anybody, whether that's an individual from the DD board, any sort of providers, or someone like me, or someone at stable account, whatever you're doing, it's important that you understand exactly what benefit an individual loved one is receiving. And sometimes that's very difficult, honestly, to know if an individual is receiving SSI or SSDI. It all comes from the Social Security Administration. there are numerous different types of Medicaid benefits. And so it can become very overwhelming to try to determine, I'm on Medicaid, but is that Medicare premium assistance? Is it a Medicaid waiver? Is it the Medicaid buy-in for workers program? Is it just simply expanded Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act? It is admittedly very difficult to understand that and to navigate all that. And that's what someone like me is here to help sort of comprehend. But I put this bullet on here because it's really important when you're trying to plan of knowing exactly what benefits are available. And so this sophisticated graph that I designed a couple years ago, that was a joke. It's hard to do this on Zoom. It's hard to joke on Zoom. Shows the relationship between the benefits. And so on the left side of this chart, you have, again, your income benefits from Social Security, supplemental security income, or SSI, and on the bottom, Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. And those are the income. On the right, you have your health insurance, your health coverage. And again, on top, along with SSI, is Medicaid. Both of those are means-tested benefits, meaning you have to pay attention how much countable assets an individual has in their name, and you have to take into account their income in order to qualify. On the bottom, you have Social Security Disability and Medicare. Now, what I want everybody to sort of think about when we're talking about Social Security Disability and Medicare is it really is a sort of early retirement for an individual that has a disability that prevents them from working. And that can be an individual that has worked, and then the disability prevents them from working, and they qualify to tap into what they've already paid into the system early, and maybe at a lesser amount, and Medicare comes along with that a couple of years later. Or for a disabled adult child who was disabled prior to the age of 22, when a parent retires, becomes disabled, or passes away, that child can sort of tap into mom or dad's Social Security benefit. But again, this sort of simple graphic here just shows how these are interrelated. So I'm going to repeat myself, and that's intentional. And so again, Social Security Disability and Medicare are not the needs-based benefits. And so if an individual is on Social Security Disability and or they have Medicare and they inherit, you know, $25,000 from a relative that was unexpected, or they win the lottery, I mean, however you want to think about when money comes in and they're on Social Security Disability, it will not affect those benefits. It won't make them stop, okay? As I said earlier, you still need to determine if other needs-based benefits may be needed in the future, like Medicaid. Likely, if you're receiving Social Security Disability, you'll never have to revert back to SSI. But again, maintaining Medicaid eligibility in order to keep your waiver, for instance, is really important. But just know that, again, Social Security Disability and Medicare, think of that as early retirement based on someone in the family, either the individual or their parents' payment into the system, okay? Now, SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and Medicaid, these are the needs-based benefits, which look at both resources and income. And this is why we do special needs estate planning. And this is why the stable account was created, for instance. For SSI and Medicaid, of countable assets, you can't have more than $2,000 in all of your accounts combined. And so basically, if even if you have $3,000 in total countable assets, you're not going to be eligible for these Medicaid programs. Now, there are some exceptions, which I mentioned earlier, that makes this all the more complicated. The Medicaid buy-in for workers with disabilities program, for instance, allows an individual that works even just a little bit every month to have more than $2,000 in assets. I think it's close to $12,000 at this point, and can earn well over $30,000 a year in income. So there are exceptions to everything, of course. But the base thought here is, remember, it's $2,000. That's what we want to keep an individual who needs these benefits under on a monthly basis. Now, it used to be $1,500 for Medicaid. In August of 2016, that was made to be consistent with the SSI level of 2,000, which has made things somewhat easier. Again, there are various income levels for the Medicaid programs. For someone who's on Medicare but doesn't have a whole lot of extra income or assets, there are about 3 levels of income that would allow for Medicaid to pay the Medicare premiums. It's called the Medicare Premium Assistance Program. Generally speaking, if you earn more than about $794 a month at the base level, that would disqualify you from base Medicaid. But of course, there are always disregards and the consideration of unearned income and things like that. Now, the last bullet here is we talk about deeming. Deeming is an important concept because I'll give an example. When a disabled child prior to the age of 18 wants to seek a Medicaid Medicaid eligibility, basically. Medicaid will deem mom and dad's income and their assets to be that child's, okay? Now there is an exception, again, always an exception, and that's the DD board waivers, like the level 1 waiver, the self waiver, the IO waiver, and things like that. So one of the aspects of that waiver is they're waiving that deeming requirement. So they're not going to look at mom and dad's assets and income. They'll look at other things, but they're not going to look at mom and dad's assets and income. Even if the individual is under 18, the individual could qualify for Medicaid. Once, getting back to the basics, once an individual reaches the age of majority, the age of 18, then that deeming stops. So even if they live in mom and dad's home, the 18-year-old who wants to apply for Medicaid or SSI, mom and dad's income and their resources are not deemed to be that child's anymore. And so 18 is a big age for determining whether a guardianship is necessary, applying for SSI, and then of course Medicaid. Because again, that deeming stops. And that's really in many cases the first time that an individual becomes truly eligible for these programs. So when we talk about the $2,000 of countable assets, what's countable? Basically everything except for what's on this list. And there's some other things that don't come up very much. But a really common concern or question is, what about all the stuff that an individual owns? Household goods, tangible personal property is not considered a countable resource. And there's good reason for that. The concept of accountable resources, can you take that countable resource and use it to provide for your own health care? Can you use it to provide for your own food and shelter? And obviously you're not going to be expected to sell your TV and your furniture in order to provide for yourself, in order to, and then qualify for Medicaid and SSI. So in-house, tangible personal property, those are exempt, okay? The second bullet is a residence. An individual is allowed to own a residence, even in their own name. And that's not counted against this $2,000 asset threshold. Now, when we get into the special needs trust, a lot of times for parents planning for their disabled children of any age, even though a residence would be exempt for that individual, it makes more planning sense to have that residence go into a third-party trust, and I'll explain why a little bit later when we get to some of those trusts. A vehicle, an individual is allowed to own a vehicle, and you obviously use that vehicle, or if they can't drive the vehicle, they're still allowed to own the vehicle if somebody else uses it to provide for their care. Irrevocable funeral and burial contracts, that's sort of a creature of the Medicaid statute. Those are exempt assets. and oftentimes those are brought up, and I think what are generally deemed as like awkward circumstances from a caseworker, like, do you have an irrevocable funeral contract? Like, we're talking about maybe like a 19 or 20-year-old, but they have to ask these things. Life insurance, as long as the total face value is less than the countable resource threshold. Again, the concept is if you can liquidate that life insurance policy and convert it to cash, then it is then you can use that money to pay for your care. As long as it's under $2,000, they don't consider that to be a countable asset. And then finally, the exempt trusts, and these are the special needs trusts that that are sort of the keystone of special needs estate planning. Okay, so I kind of like to take a step back and kind of bring all this together at this point, and that is, what's a typical timeline for an individual? So, and when I say child, I really am speaking to parents with loved ones of any age that have disability. And so, but I'm going to use the word child. So generally, when a child has a disability from birth to 18, as I mentioned, except for in circumstances where a waiver is granted prior to the age of 18, there are usually minimal benefits unless there's a very low income family, or again, the child is on the Medicaid waiver program. And that is because, again, that deeming of assets and income to the child from the parents. Okay, so that doesn't mean that you shouldn't coordinate and talk to the Board of Developmental Disabilities about perhaps the availability of a waiver, or how to prepare for when the child becomes 18, or that transition period between 18 and 22. It doesn't mean that there aren't other services that may be provided outside of Medicaid eligibility. But when we're talking about the means tested benefits, it's typically there are minimal benefits for birth to age 18. Age 18 again is a big number for a lot of reasons. First, the parent's income and assets again are no longer deemed to the child, so they can apply for SSI on their own, on their own record, with their own financial information. Now, what I'll tell everybody here, and I'm not laying any blame at the Social Security Administration caseworkers' feet or anything else like that, but I've heard dozens and dozens and dozens of clients come back to me and say, we applied for SSI at age 18, and they came back and they were asking for meaning parents' tax returns. And they said, no, your child's not going to qualify. And they've essentially been turned away. That's why it's I'm actually passionate about sharing this information, because at age 18, they are not to look at parents' income or assets any longer. Okay, they're on their own at that point. And I'm not suggesting that you need to push back on your own. You can recruit the help of, again, a person like me, or if you're connected with maybe a support administrator with the board to sort of guide you through that process. But to know at the very least that maybe you're being told something that needs looking into more, I think is invaluable if you're going through this, really at any age, but particularly at age 18. So without that deeming of income and assets from the parent, you come into SSI and Medicaid eligibility. Again, that's, to put this into sort of real terms, an individual with a disability who perhaps is still in school and not working, turns 18, you apply for SSI, they're going to say, number one, is the individual disabled? Well, what does that mean for Social Security? That means, is the disability that the individual have preventing them from engaging in what's called substantial gainful activity? And substantial gainful activity is defined as earnings from work that amount to, I don't know the exact number, but it's like $1,260 gross earned income every month. It might be a little higher this year. What that means is if you could, notwithstanding an individual's disability, if you can go get a job and earn $1,300 a month gross in monthly earned income, then Social Security will say, we understand that this individual has whatever's going on, but we don't consider them disabled. Okay, that's an important number, that substantial gainful activity, to keep in mind. So you apply for SSI, they'll say, is the individual disabled? Yes, the disability is preventing them from engaging in substantial gainful activity. Then they look to financial eligibility, and they'll say, does the individual have $2,000 or less in their name of countable assets? Yes, okay. Then they'll look at income. They're not receiving any income, or maybe they're receiving some, but it's under the threshold. That individual will qualify for SSI. If you qualify for $1 of SSI, then you automatically qualify for Medicaid in Ohio. And you would think, well, I don't want to say you would think, it should be very streamlined, and oftentimes it is, but I would still suggest that you make two applications, one to SSI through the Social Security Administration, and then the other to Medicaid. If you're already receiving SSI, the Medicaid application goes much, much smoother. This final bullet, even if an individual is working part-time, they may be eligible to receive Social Security disability on their own earnings. And so if an individual with a disability has worked and paid into the Social Security system through payroll deductions and taxes and things like that, but they're still under that substantial gainful activity, they may be eligible to, again, take that sort of early retirement, tapping into their own Social Security payment to receive Social Security disability. And even if it's a small amount, there are cases when an individual can receive their own Social Security disability payment of $250 a month. And then the remainder of that can be made up through SSI. So you can receive SSI, you can receive Social Security disability. 2 years after you receive your Social Security disability check, you'll get Medicare, but then you'll also be eligible for Medicaid. So that gets back to that oval graphic, that these are all important, they're all intertwined, and there are cases where all four of them may come into play. That's also why I put on the early slide that it's very important to verify which benefits an individual is receiving. So the next important age is the age of 22. I'd mentioned it before. If an individual is disabled prior to the age of 22, when the parent retires or becomes disabled themselves, the child is eligible for what's called disabled adult child benefits, in which they will receive 1/2 of the parent's benefits. So by way of example, if dad retires at age 70 and begins receiving his Social Security retirement, his regular Social Security retirement, and 30-year-old disabled son who had been determined disabled prior to the age of 22 is receiving SSI at that point, that SSI will convert to Social Security disability, which again isn't means tested. This is great news. The other thing is the Social Security disability amount will be 1/2 of dad's check. So if dad is receiving $2,000 a month in his own Social Security retirement, the disabled adult child will receive $1,000. Okay. When the parent passes away, the child will, that 50% goes up to 3/4. It goes up to 75%. And then 2 years after the first Social Security disability check goes out, the individual will receive their Medicare card. Okay. And that's the same Medicare that an individual gets when they turn 65. It's Medicare, it's health insurance. And again, it's not means tested. So you don't need to worry about this $2,000 in countable assets and things like that. So it's very important to keep this age of 22 in mind. There are many cases where if you haven't applied for Social Security, even after the age of 22, you can go back and clearly demonstrate that the individual was disabled prior to that age. But I encourage anyone that is, that is able to apply with Social Security prior to the age of 22, at age 18 or somewhere in between there, to get that determination set in stone. So as far as, what does this all get an individual? SSI is an income stipend, again, of $794 per month. That's last year, it was 781 or 2 or something like that. It goes up $8 or $10 a month or a year. So right now it's at $794. SSI is supposed to pay for an individual's food and shelter. Okay, so and I don't want to get too far into the weeds of SSI, but if an individual is receiving food or shelter from another source, even mom or dad, if they're living in their home, that SSI benefit is going to be reduced by a maximum of 1/3. And there are a number of ways to, to negate that or to remedy that deduction. Using a stable account really helps for that, and I bet you Nick can talk about that in the next half. But that's what SSI is. It's a relatively low stipend, and if an individual is earning their own income, even under the $794 amount, there are going to be deductions and things like that. Okay, and then Medicaid. So what does Medicaid pay for? Medicaid is the payer of last resort, basically. So it will pay for any medical or hospital care, prescriptions, medically necessary dental and vision, and residential and institutional care that's necessary, that's not paid for by other insurance like Medicare or private insurance. And so if you think about it in those terms, even an individual that's on mom and dad's health insurance, it would be advantageous to be eligible and maintain Medicaid eligibility so that anything that's not covered that's necessary would be covered by Medicaid. And once you have base Medicaid eligibility, it's much easier to sort of move from one program or Medicaid version to the next. But there are catches to that, and we'll get to that. Estate recovery is a big reason why we do special needs estate planning. We talk about the waivers. You can get up to $14,000 a month through the home and community-based services waivers for adults that need that in the home. Those are sort of different from the DD board waivers, but that's, I think, for a different talk, all the differences and all the different types of Medicaid waivers. All right, so how in the heck does this relate to special needs planning and trust? I mean, I wanted to get the basics, and I tried to keep it basic on all the benefits so that we can sort of understand how trusts come in, okay? There are two broad types of exempt trusts, okay? And they're exempt meaning the money in those trusts is not going to count in that $2,000 Medicaid and SSI asset threshold. And the two different types of trusts are distinguished by who owns or owned the assets that go into that. Okay, so I want you to think about the third party discretionary trust. When we say third party, that means it's usually set up by mom or dad, a third party, and the money going into that trust belongs to mom or dad. It does not belong to the individual beneficiary, the person that needs Medicaid or SSI. That's distinguished by or differentiated by the next bullet here, the self-settled special needs trust. Self-settled meaning that's a special needs trust. It's exempt, but it is funded with assets that did belong to the beneficiary, okay? So I'll try to come up with an easy example right now. Individual on Medicaid, on a waiver, they absolutely rely on their waiver benefits and SSI. And they get a check in the mail for $25,000 from a long lost uncle, and they never expected this would happen. And let's call it $50,000. That $50,000 immediately puts them over the threshold for eligibility for Medicaid. They would lose their waiver, and then SSI, which is less important in this example. So what can you do with that? You can establish a self-settled special needs trust, or what we call a Medicaid payback trust, and that individual's money that they're entitled to, that they got in the mail, or however they're entitled to it, can be put into that trust and becomes exempt, okay? On the other hand, if mom or dad pass away, say mom and dad pass away, but they've set up a third-party discretionary trust, instead of the money going to the to their child, they're going to put it directly into this third-party discretionary trust. Now, why is that important that we have these two types of trusts with these two different sources of funding? Why is there a distinction here? It's because self-settled trusts must have a Medicaid payback provision. Congress in 1993 basically made a compromise. They said an individual that has assets can still qualify for Medicaid if they put those assets in a trust for their benefit, as long as if there's money left in that trust when the individual dies, it pays back the state for Medicaid expenses paid on their behalf, okay? The third-party discretionary trust, mom and dad's trust that they set up for their kids, that's funded after they pass away, there is no requirement for a Medicaid payback provision, meaning that if the beneficiary passes away, then that money can be retained in that trust and used for other family members or on down the line. And that's dictated by whoever creates that third-party trust. And again, the reason for that is because the beneficiary, the Medicaid recipient, has no control over that. They never did control it. They were never entitled to it. And so because they were never entitled to it, there doesn't need to be a Medicaid payback. Okay. Now I call all of these trusts special needs trusts. There's just different types. And for the most part, administering these trusts are the same. If you're talking about a third-party discretionary trust or a Medicaid payback trust, the money can be used by and large for just about anything that the beneficiary needs at the discretion of the trustee. I get many, many questions all year round from all sources. Well, I thought there were huge restrictions on what I could use the trust money for. To be honest, it's almost a myth. Unless the individual is on SSI and you need to be careful about how you're spending the money for food and for shelter costs so as to not minimize that. Typically, as long as you're using these trust funds to benefit the beneficiary, make their life better, provide them with what they need or what they want, or improve their quality of life, those are going to be permissible transfers. So I give this example because I think it sort of demonstrates, the following example sort of demonstrates just sort of the scope of what a special needs trust can be used for. When I was early in my career, we had a beneficiary of a Medicaid payback trust. And I think, I don't know, a family member was the trustee. And this was an adult individual with a disability. He was very high functioning. I think he was actually quadriplegic. He had, but he lived in his own home. He had a setup that was, that made him able to ambulate. And his hobby was trains. He loved everything about trains. And he asked the trustee if he could have a company come in and build a model train that was installed essentially in his house, that went from room to room, that he could control using his assisted technology. And indeed, the trustee was fully able to and agreed that, and we advised them, yeah, you can do that. So they hired a company, I think out of Indiana, to come in and spent well over $10,000 to have this ornate, really cool model train come in. It made his life better. Now that's a wild example, I know, but it just gives you an idea of it. Look, it made his life better, it improved the quality of his life. That's what these funds are there for. Okay. Okay, so the third-party trust, again, this is like the trust that mom and dad are going to set up. These are defined in the Medicaid trust statute. Again, if you walk away with anything, it's this trust, these third-party discretionary trusts are funded with assets which never belonged to the disabled beneficiary. If these funds that went into this trust belong to the disabled beneficiary, then there would have to be a Medicaid payback provision. And we don't want a Medicaid payback provision on these, okay? Now, I'm going to skip the last bullet here because it gets a little too far into the legal weeds. Now, switching back to the self-settled trusts. Again, these are a creature of federal statute established in 1993. They're used for funds, again, which the disabled person owns. So whether it's an inheritance, whether it's proceeds from litigation, a lot of times individuals with, babies with birth injuries, sometimes receive legal settlements. Those funds are considered that individuals. They have to go into a Medicaid payback trust. Sometimes these self-settled trusts are used for child support in what we call castle cases. That's when after a divorce, an individual is receiving child support, and that child support continues beyond the age of 18. That's what we call a castle child. It's named after a Supreme Court of Ohio case back in the 80s that stood for the proposition that if an individual is disabled, then child support would continue beyond the age of majority. And unfortunately, sometimes some of the third-party trusts are improperly drafted. This happened earlier in my career, where people would maybe try to get cute with their lawyer and try to create a third-party trust that maybe had the money of an individual, and you have to convert it to one of these self-settled trusts. The linchpin here is if the money belonged to the beneficiary or if they were entitled to it, it has to have that Medicaid payback provision. While I'm on the topic of the Medicaid payback provision, it is not a full payback. It is a reimbursement. If the state has paid out $50,000 over the course of the individual's lifetime, and there's $100,000 left in the trust, the state's only getting $50,000. They're only going to get what they spent. It's not a full payback. Okay. I realize that I'm going long here, so I'm going to get through the trust section of this. I'll withhold the guardianship stuff, but then I'll go to questions. So don't worry. The Medicaid payback trust, the self-settled trust, must be established by the individual if they have capacity, a parent, a grandparent, a guardian, or a court. A third party, a neighbor, a sister, an aunt or an uncle cannot establish a Medicaid payback trust, a self-settled trust. It has to be the individual themselves, parent, a grandparent, a guardian, or a court. Also, it must be established and funded prior to the beneficiary's age of 65. Okay, so if someone is 70 years old and going into a nursing home, they can't use this Medicaid payback trust. It's really designed for adults who are not elderly to utilize to maintain Medicaid eligibility. And of course, the payback provision, which I talked about. Again, it must be for the sole benefit of the disabled individual. It can't benefit anybody else. It can be revocable or irrevocable, although I would never draft a revocable Medicaid payback trust. Broad discretion, that means the trustee, I mentioned it earlier, has very, very broad discretion. Sole, absolute, and uncontrolled discretion is the language to use those trust funds for the sole benefit of the beneficiary. And then again, one of the things that is a sort of a sticking point for us lawyers when we're reviewing these trusts, the payback provision should not be state specific. So if you have a trust that says, if you have a Medicaid payback trust already and you're looking at it tonight after this, and it says that the Medicaid payback provision must be to the state of Ohio, and it doesn't even have an apostrophe S after state for states, then we may have a problem with the drafting of that trust. Not something that can't be fixed, but it can't be state specific. What they're getting at there is if an individual lives in Ohio and gets Medicaid, then they move to Illinois and get Medicaid. If there's money left in the trust, it goes back to Ohio and Illinois on a pro rata basis. Okay, I'm skipping through this because Nick is going to talk about it. And I think I'll end with this simple case study and then we'll go to any questions. Okay, so this is a really simple sort of example. Mom and dad have 2 kids. One of the children has a disability. The trust that they set up, the third-party trust, mom and dad set up, the beneficiaries are both kids. Within that trust is going to be this third-party discretionary trust for the benefit of the disabled child. Okay, so that's all set up. Then what do? You have an insurance policy. Okay, your insurance policy could be you could name one beneficiary as the non-disabled child, and then you could name the wholly discretionary third-party trust as the beneficiary of the other half of that. And so I'm really trying to make this simple to see, you don't want your assets to be inherited by your child with a disability. You want that to go to this third-party trust. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this, get to my last slide here, and open it up if we have any questions, because I went long, sorry. A lot to cover.
Dave, can you stop your share screen and then we should be able to see more people?
Yeah. Yep.
Of course, they're all not on camera. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask about the estate planning? Going once, going twice. Dave, you're getting let off really easy tonight.
All right, I'm not going to let everybody off that easy, and I'm not going to lie down without any questions. So there's a chat feature at the bottom of everyone's screen. If you have a question while Nick is talking or anything about what I said, feel free to put your question in that chat, and then we can see that. And maybe if we can't answer them after Nick has finished, then we can, maybe I can put those answers in an email that we can distribute or something like that. So don't hesitate to put your questions in a chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. All right, so Nick, we are ready to hear about stable accounts.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, everybody let Dave off easy. I hope to not get out easy. I was in a evening presentation yesterday and it went in, just me alone, it went an hour and a half. So that's how many questions I had. So for those of you that are here, I would love to see something similar, although I'm sure Jody and Dave would not like to see that. But regardless, I am really happy to be here this evening. So what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I am on the same, or I am in the same boat as Dave, that if you have any questions at all at any time, please let me know and we will tackle them as we go along. I think that that's the best way to do things. So the reason why I'm showing everybody our website first and foremost is because this is where anything and everything is done in terms of the stable account. So enrolling in the stable account, maintaining the stable account, getting more information about it like we're going to do this evening, contacting our team for any needs, requesting a stable card, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we're just going to jump on in. I will come back to this page every so often, but I'll make sure to reference it when we do as well. So the resources page, as a member of the outreach team for the State of Ohio Treasurer's Office, is where I do all of my work, because we are doing outreach, so people need to know about as many possible resources. And as you can see, there are quite a bit of them. And what we're going to focus on is the presentation tonight, because Jody was kind enough to send everybody the outline beforehand. The outline goes step by step, just doesn't have any of the fun pictures. So it's also, when we were in person, it was also much easier to print out as well. Now, a lot of people question where we have the ability to create stable accounts from, because people might say, well, where did you get the authority? Are stable accounts going anywhere? What does the future look like for stable accounts? Well, we're not going anywhere, of course, but the way that we have the ability to do what we do is through federal and state law. And that federal law is called the ABLE Act. And the ABLE Act stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. And this allows for when individuals or their families put money into this account, it is an asset shield, which means that the money that is put into this account does not negatively affect somebody's resource limits. And so when we created our plan here in Ohio, we named it Stable Account, and that stands for State Treasury Achieving a Better Life Experience. So that's what I'm going to refer to it as from now on, because that's just our plan. But a couple of things about our plan is that you do not, just because it's, we started in Ohio and we operate out of Ohio, you do not have to be an Ohio resident to join. You can be a member of any state. We already have people in all 50 states that have joined, and it doesn't matter where you live here in Ohio as well. But one thing to keep in mind is that you cannot go to a bank for this. That is also a question I get a ton of is, well, what bank is this associated with? Where do I go in and sign up? We are not associated with a bank, because then that would alienate members of the community that either, that specific branch wasn't in their area or wasn't even in their state. So that's why everything is offered online and not through brick and mortar, because it offers a lot more people the opportunity to be able to utilize this program as well. Continuing on here is that I mentioned earlier that stable accounts are a resource shield as well. And so when you think about that, we can think of SSI and Medicaid. But of course, those two are not exhaustive. Those are two of the biggest players that are giving benefits out to individuals. But by no means are they. There's also Section 8 housing. There's food stamps. There's so many more means-tested benefits that would qualify people to also have a stable account as well. And we are on the cusp of celebrating our 5-year anniversary of being open. And while that's not a lot of time in the financial world, what we had the opportunity to do because of that was we were able to combine different parts of already existing financial programs. So whether it's a 529 college savings plan, a checking account, a savings account, a certain type of trust, whether that's, a discretionary trust or a special needs trust, Roth IRAs, investment accounts. There are a lot of different similarities that you'll see to other financial programs here when I'm talking about stable. And there's a good reason for that as well, is because, because we are later in the financial game, we had that opportunity as well. Now, I mentioned the key component to stable is that we are able to help people save their assets above that $2,000 limit. Of course, that's true. But one thing that's also important to note is that the money that's saved in a stable account will also help out for eligibility purposes. So let's say that somebody isn't even receiving benefits at this time. Maybe they're a minor, or maybe they are planning to receive benefits in the future. Well, most of those benefits have eligibility requirements. And for some of them, not all of them, but for some of them, that also includes an asset limit, because these are means-tested benefits. So having a stable account even before applying for these benefits can be very important as well, because when somebody applies for benefits, the amount that they have in a stable account, of course, cannot negatively affect their benefits either. Okay. Ownership is also a unique component to stable accounts, in the sense that the person with the disability, or what I will refer to as account holder, what the account holder has the opportunity to do is open up, maintain, and be in charge of their own stable account. Now, of course, that's not that doesn't happen in every case, but that is an opportunity here when it comes to stable accounts. And that itself is a step in terms of financial independence, but stable accounts can also be an investment account. So that we are a savings and investment account. The investment side is optional, but for a lot of folks, this is the first time that they've been able to have the opportunity to invest their funds without it being negatively affecting that resource limit as well. It's good to note that anybody and everybody can be putting money into a stable account. So it does not matter your relationship with the account holder. It could be family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, you name it. Anybody can contribute. Now, anybody that does contribute and they're living here in the state of Ohio, they get a state income tax deduction. And so that's currently up to $4,000 state income tax deduction that's available to them. But also, this includes unlimited rollover. So let's say, an uncle contributes $10,000 to, their niece or nephew's stable account. Well, they'd be able to claim for 1 year, for the next year, and to the year after that. So just because they're not able to get it done in one fell swoop doesn't mean they won't be able to get it done at all. That's exactly where what this can help out with as well. It's where that unlimited rollover really comes in handy. Now, eligibility is where I'm going to take people back to the main page here, is that when you're at the main page of the website, there's this eligibility button. And I always like to take people to this because when you click on it, it scrolls you down the screen and you can see the eligibility quiz with this huge green button right there. And the eligibility quiz is fantastic because even if you hear a presentation, or even if you're just talking to somebody, or you're a professional that's out in the field, it doesn't matter. This eligibility quiz is a great resource to point people to. It's just right there on the website, really easy to access. And what I like about there are a few things I like. It takes less than 60 seconds, all yes or no questions, gives an immediate answer, and you don't have to put in any personal information either. It just spits out an answer for you. And the reason why the eligibility quiz does not take very long is because there are only 3 requirements to eligibility. The first one is that somebody cannot already have an account. There is a limit of 1 account per person. The second rule is that the disability or the condition must have been diagnosed, occurred, onset, have been showing symptoms prior to the age of 26 for the account holder. Now, I always like to really make sure that I stress here that it is not just the fact, people do not have to be under 26 to enroll. Like I said, we've only been open for 5 years, and we already have people in their 80s and 90s that have enrolled. Those account holders were just able to state that their disability had occurred, been onset, showing symptoms prior to the age of 26. So you can enroll at any age. There is no age minimum, no age maximum. The only rule is that that disability must have occurred prior to the age of 26. The third rule, I call it an umbrella rule because we ask the folks to just meet one of these next 3 criteria, just one, not all 3. And the first one is that somebody is already receiving SSI or SSDI, or even if they're eligible to receive, but for whatever reason, they may not be receiving. So in a lot of cases, an example of that is where somebody has been deemed eligible due to their disability, but they have been deemed ineligible due to a parent's income in the case of a minor. So that's an example of that. The second option, I should say, is if an individual has a condition that's on the list of compassionate allowances. This is something that Social Security puts out every year, and they put it out every year. It changes a little bit here and there. And what it does is it allows for more people to enroll and have Social Security benefits. That's exactly what we use this list for as well, so that more people can enroll and take advantage of having a stable account. And you'll notice that those 2 options that I pointed out, they all talk about Social Security. Well, what if somebody is not receiving benefits from Social Security? Or what if somebody isn't receiving benefits at all? That's exactly where self-certification comes in, because self-certification is, an account holder saying, hey, I meet those first two rules to where I do not already have an account and my disability has occurred prior to the age of 26. And the way that I'm going to meet the third rule is through self-certification. And self-certification is just a doctor's diagnosis. So a doctor's diagnosis that the account holder's condition has lasted or will last at least 1 year. And so another thing that I want to note is that something that I get a question a lot of, especially from the NAMI communities. You know, I know that I'm with the board of DD here, but I just want to make sure that people are aware of this, is that having a stable account is not exclusively for those that may have developmental disabilities or physical disabilities. There can be people that may have conditions that are mental in nature or other types of disabilities, that it is not exclusive just to the DD community. Going on, again, enrollment, I'm going to take people back to the main page here, and we're going to scroll all the way up. You can see two huge open an account buttons right here. Our website is where everything is done. And what's great about this everything being on our website is that we're able to streamline the process, so there is no enrollment cost. It does not cost anything to open up a stable account. You'll see there that there's a $50 opening deposit, but I always like to make sure that people know that is not a fee. All it does is simply create an opening balance within the account. And we always like to tell people that it takes 20-25 minutes to enroll, and our website is Screen Reading Technology. There are multiple videos on YouTube of people enrolling and creating stable accounts. There's one, her name's Dorothy. She lives all the way out in California. And Dorothy has been diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and she can type with one finger on each hand. And so she created a video to show people how to enroll in stable account. And that she chose, you know, even though she lives in California, she wanted to choose our program as well. But Dorothy enrolled in less than 15 minutes. So I know that she's much better with a computer than I am, but regardless, we just want to let people know that no matter what abilities people may have, we want to be able to make sure that our website can tailor to that as well. At the beginning, I noted that ownership was a huge component to what we do, and it is. But ownership for account holders isn't always available. And that's exactly where an authorized legal representative comes in, or an ALR for short. And when there is an ALR involved, that person is a parent, a guardian, or a power of attorney. So parent, guardian, or power of attorney can become an ALR. Now, we just had federal legislation passed actually within 2021, and we're changing some of our functionality because that legislation actually expanded the role of an ALR. So it expanded it to siblings, and it expanded it to representative payees as well. So now, you know, that list of people that can become an authorized legal representative has expanded. So parent, guardian, power of attorney, representative payee, siblings. There may be more in the future. We don't know exactly, but this is what we know now. And so when there is an ALR involved, the ALR is in charge of the account. They can decide how the funds are invested. They can decide if there's going to be a stable card. They can decide, you know, how the money is, or excuse me, what the money is going to be spent on. And they also have the ability to decide, because each account is different and each situation is different, about when it comes to if the account holder will utilize any of these features, or, you know, if they have an allowance using the stable account. That's, you know, completely up to the ALR as well. And don't forget that if you do have questions, please feel free to be putting them in the chat as well. Okay, moving on. There are two different ways that people can put money into the account, deposit funds into the stable account. The first one is electronically, to where people can, you know, have an EFT and just transfer funds into the stable account as well. The second one is a check. People can make out a check, and At that point in time, we have a specific way that people would fill out their check, and it can get directly deposited into the account from there as well. Now, I'm going to mention 3 numbers here, but to be honest with you, you'll only have to focus on 2 of them, and I'll explain myself in just a moment. The first one is $15,000. This is our annual contribution limit. What I mean by the annual contribution limit is today's May 12th. So somebody creates a stable account and enrolls in a stable account today. They have from May 12th until December 31st to contribute up to $15,000 into their account. When the calendar flips, they have the opportunity to contribute another $15,000 into the account. So it doesn't matter what they contributed in the previous year. Maybe it was $5, maybe it was $15,000. That regardless, they will have the opportunity to contribute another $15,000 on top of it. And again, this $15,000 is combined from everybody that's contributing into the account, because I mentioned anybody and everybody can be putting funds into the stable account. But it is all of those people combined to equal the $15,000 as well. The next number is $12,760. You might be thinking to yourself, Nick, that number is really odd. What gives? Well, I agree with you. This is the federal poverty line for a single income household. And so this is added on top of the $15,000 for those people who are employed. There are no requirements for employment as long as somebody is just receiving a paycheck. It could be seasonal work, hourly work, part-time, or full-time. It does not matter. Contract work does not matter. That folks are able to utilize this feature as well. And the way that people would bridge the gap between that $15,000 and that $27,760 is by using wages. So there are 2 ways that people can put wages into their account. One, they receive it the normal way, whether that is via check or whether that is via direct deposit from their employer, and they go ahead and transfer that money from a checking or savings account right into their stable account. The second way would be just having funds directly deposited from the employer. We populate a form for every person that wants one that will allow for them to choose how much money they want to go into their stable account at all times. So they can choose a certain percent, they can choose a certain number that from each paycheck will be directly deposited into their stable account as well. What's something to note about this is that, the only thing to really note about this one last part is that if somebody's wage is less than $12,760 a year, well, then that number is going to shrink. So the best way I can explain this is that if somebody's annual income is $10,000 a year, well, then it would only be $10,000 on top of 15 instead of the 12,000. So that would mean that their limit would go to $25,000, but it wouldn't be $27,760. So that's the way that people can look at that, because you're not able to contribute more than you earn because this is wages as well. And then the lifetime limit is $501,000. I really, I don't like talking about this a ton for a few reasons. One, it goes up every year, so it's going to be really tough to catch it. But 2, for a similar reason that we started off 5 years ago when this was at $426,000. So in 5 years, it's gone up over $75,000, and it's going to continue to go up as well. Okay. I'm going to skip this one for the sake of time, but just to kind of give a recap is that it allows for people to know that at this point in time, they can use the e-gifting feature as a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter for the account holder as well. All right. I mentioned earlier that the stable account is a savings and investment tool, and it is. The investing is optional, but here it is. what you see, I like to show people the examples actually from the enrollment site. So these are 3 different screenshots from the enrollment site. And that the one on the left, or the dark blue banner, is exactly what everybody sees, to where none of the investment options are selected. The only one that is selected is Bank Safe. The Bank Safe is FDIC insured, it's principal protected, and you will see no earnings on the Bank Safe option. If people want to, they can take some of those funds and put them into the investment options. Growth, moderate growth, conservative growth, and income are all different mutual funds that people can take advantage of, and they have the opportunity to invest in. Now, what the middle banner and the right banner try to depict is that you can divide this up however you want. You can maybe just use one of the accounts. You might just want to use 2 of them, or you can use all 5 of them. You can distribute it evenly. You can distribute it very unevenly. The investment portion is completely based on whatever the account holder or the ALR wants to do. We do not give financial advice, so we do not tell people what to invest in or where to invest it. They have the opportunity to choose these funds if they want to, and those funds see earnings. Well, 2 things to note about that. If the account sees earnings, the earnings grow tax-free. And if the earnings grow tax-free, then the earnings are also tax-free upon withdrawal as well. So regardless, this is an opportunity for people to make sure that they can get what they, or excuse me, that they can have the opportunity to invest those funds as well. But just like any investing, it does come with risk. So there is a risk to any investing, and stable accounts are no different from that either. Spending the funds, I enjoy talking about this because there are so many different things and kind of rabbit holes even that we could go down. But what's different than stable accounts than many other different financial accounts is the fact that we have 2 guiding rules. So many different types of accounts or many different benefits have, set in stone lists of things you can and can not spend the money on. And, Dave did a good job, he mentioned examples of as well, especially of the train set, and that is a phenomenal to help improve somebody's quality of life and make sure that they're happier living their own life. And that's exactly what stable accounts try to do as well, is that our 2 rules make sure that we can, help people improve their quality of life as well. And so the 2 rules when it comes to stable accounts, the first rule is that expense, whatever the expense may be, needs to be for the account holder. So it can't be spent on family. It can't be spent on friends. It needs to be spent for the account holder. The second rule is that expense needs to help maintain or improve health, independence, or quality of life. And so if we're taking a step back and we're thinking about that, helping to maintain or improve health, independence, or quality of life is really broad. But that's awesome. And it's great because this is not a cookie cutter type of account. This can mold based on an individual's needs as well, because we have over 25,000 people enrolled that have stable accounts, and not all of those individuals have the same needs. Just like one specific account holder won't have the same needs, 5 or 10 years from now. So making sure that they have an account that can mold with them and be malleable is very important. Now, the examples that you see here are things that I kind of call our heavy hitters. So these are our big ticket items that we see account holders spending out of their stable account for most often. Housing and rent, basic living expenses like going to the grocery store or buying clothes, transportation, education. This point right here is important because this is a huge reason why we see many people will transfer funds over from a 529 college savings plan over into a stable account, because right here just goes to prove is that a stable account has a much broader spending power than a 529, but of course can still be used for educational purposes as well. Assistive technology, service animals, any bills that somebody may have, these are all examples of things that can be spent on out of the stable account. And I just want you all to know is that it's not just these broad categories, of course, that are included in this. It's everything that goes along with it. So when it comes to housing and rent, it's not just the fact that, somebody turned on their air conditioning and it started smoking for the first time this year. Well, that's not great. So need to get that problem fixed as soon as possible. Or for transportation, it's not just the fact that somebody has a car payment. It's the fact that, the car needs gas. The person needs insurance to drive. They have to stand in line at the BMV and get a new driver's license. Maybe somebody wants to have a handicap accessible upgrade to their vehicle. Or another total option is that somebody may not have the opportunity to drive. So they're going to be using, community transportation like a bus line, or they can use anything like Uber or Lyft to make sure that they can be getting around town to wherever they need to be as well. So it's going to show you that the power is extremely broad, and that's the way that we want it here as well. There are 3 different ways that people can withdraw funds and spend the funds out of their stable account. The first one is transferring money to and from a checking or savings account. This is a great way to get money in. It's also a way that money can come out as well. The main reason why we see money coming out from the stable account and going into a checking or savings account is for cash access. That's because we do not allow cash access any other way. And I'll mention this again because I have it, a few slides from now, but I also, kind of want to caution people is that when you take money and you put it back into a checking or a savings account, well, you're putting those funds back into a countable resource. So if you transfer $100 from stable into a checking account, well, it was protected, but now that it's not in the stable account, it is no longer protected. So that money is now a countable resource when it is in the checking or savings account, even if it came from stable as well. Now, the second option is a third-party check. So at this point in time, what happens is that an account holder would go online and fill out a virtual check. So while that sounds odd, what happens is that, somebody would fill out all the information. So how much the check is, where it needs to go. And then at that point in time, they submit the information, and that actually comes to us and our office, and we're writing a physical check and mailing it. We do that for a few reasons. One of them, of course, is security protections, but also another one is that, we try to streamline the process as much as possible. And if we can save our account holders money to where you don't have to purchase new checkbooks or, any new checks, don't have to buy stamps, don't have to buy envelopes, don't have to worry about going to the post office, that it's an easier, streamlined way to send checks because places still require checks. But this is good to make sure that people have this available to them as well. Okay. And then the final way that people can spend money out of the stable account is by utilizing the stable card. And the stable card makes the stable account an everyday type of spending account because the stable card is a Visa card. So it can be spent anywhere, on the 99% of the globe, the Visa cards are accepted. But what people need to know is that the card is loadable so that people can take money from the stable account and load it onto the stable card and spend it as they need to. So let's say that somebody has $5,000 in their stable account. That's great. Somebody takes $100 and puts it onto the stable card. $100 is all the card knows. It is not going to spend more money than it has on it. So this is a security protection, a fraud protection in case the card falls into the wrong hands or it's stolen, that somebody can't just pull out all of the money associated with the account at once. Going along those lines, there is no overdraft because of that. There is no, and also along with that, there is no overdraft fees. There are no low balance fees. There are no $0 balance fees. These are all things to be keeping in mind because for a lot of banks, they might have these kind of ticky-tack fees. We don't have any of those associated with stable either. People can spend down to $0.00, and that's okay. There's also a reason why we do not allow cash access, to kind of circle back to this point, is that we want to be able to track every dollar in and every dollar out of the stable account. And we can't do that when cash is involved. So just like people look on to their normal bank account or bank websites to figure out, oh, the date the money was spent, where it was spent, and how much was spent. So, today's May 12th. Let's say somebody spent $100 in Heinen's today. That would show up on that roster list of all deposits and withdrawals as well. And this is a great way that we can showcase record keeping. Record keeping is a huge question that I get from parents and guardians, and even when I speak with probate courts, magistrates want to know about our reporting functionality. And what comes along with this is this satisfies many of the reporting qualifications for spending and withdrawal deposit records. But also, if people want to take it up a notch, we also offer the opportunity for people to take a picture of that receipt and attach it to that line item. So, we spent $100 at Heinen's today. That person takes a picture and they attach it to that line item. So now people don't have to have shoeboxes full of receipts hidden in the closets collecting dust. And it's on us to be making sure that those receipts are, kept there and kept safe as well. SSI considerations. Before I talk about this slide, I just want to let people know this information only has to deal with SSI, not SSDI, not survivor benefits, not normal retirement benefits, not Medicaid, not Section 8, not food stamps, just SSI. So when stable accounts, first started, Social Security for SSI's purpose gave us some restrictions. So we had to let people know what those are. The first one is that any balance over $100,000 would be counted as a resource, which means that anything over $100,000 isn't as protected as the first $100,000. So, and just like Dave was talking about earlier, Hickman and Lowder is a great place to make sure that people can continue to save those funds as well, because using community resources to continue to save that money will allow you to then, if you take 50,000 or you take the 100,000 and you put it in another account like a trust, then you can then have the stable account free again to continue to save and to continue to utilize on an everyday basis. The second option is something that we already talked about, but I want to circle back to it as well, is that when people take money from the stable account and you transfer it out to a checking or savings account, it is once again a countable resource. And that's important to note, because that is exactly why we have the check and that's why we have the card. Because when you spend funds directly out of the stable account, they're never a countable resource. But if you transfer the funds back into a checking account, well, those funds are a countable resource once again. And then finally, the big rule for SSI is always about wages. SSI dictates how much somebody receives based on how much they're earning. And if they're earning, at or under the threshold that SSI has set for them. That wage rule still exists. We can't change Social Security's rules. We're just letting people know that, these wage rules still exist, but you are, of course, able and have the opportunity to directly deposit those funds into a stable account as well. Okay. If an account holder passes away, well, what's going to happen is that the account will then pass to the estate. And so the estate administrator, whoever that may be, will get in contact with us, and we will let them have temporary spending access out of the account to be able to spend on end-of-life expenses. You see on the screen that there is no designated transfer upon death. What this essentially means is that you cannot name a beneficiary directly within the stable account. So somebody to immediately inherit the funds upon death. Well, the way that people can dictate where they want their remaining funds to go after they passed away is by utilizing a will. And so if somebody has a will, then those actions can be executed. If somebody does not have a will, then that account, the stable account, will be considered a part of the larger estate, and the estate will be dealt with by that county probate court. So in this case, Lake County Probate Court would be handling the estate process and how those funds and assets get distributed as well. A question that I get a lot from parents and guardians especially is, well, what about Medicaid? What about Medicaid? Well, when it comes to Medicaid, for those of you that may not know about a Medicaid payback, it's when somebody passes away, Medicaid is going to try to recoup the funds that they gave to somebody while they were alive. This includes waivers and obviously a lot more, but just for this case in point, we want to make sure that Medicaid can get as little as funds as possible. So that's why we've incorporated a lot of different protections. The first one is that there needs to be an overlap of amounts. And so what I mean by that is that, let's say somebody's been receiving Medicaid for 10 years. Well, they open up a stable account today. There was no overlap before. So when they pass away, Medicaid cannot ask for those previous 10 years from the stable account. They would have to go to other financial accounts to ask for those funds. So the overlap is just funds that were given to somebody while they had the stable account open. And if there is not an overlap, which we've seen before, then this provision just goes right out the window in terms of a stable account. If there is an overlap, well, then that's the most that Medicaid would be able to ask for. But then once we found the total overlapped amount, we start chipping away. So we're paying for end-of-life expenses. We're paying for funeral, burial costs. Now we can look at paying for bills, whether it's medical fees, legal fees, or even just normal household bills like a remaining rent payment, remaining utility bills, anything like that. So again, we're chipping away at this. And then finally is we ask, is that account holder a part of the Medicaid buy-in process? And if that person is a part of the Medicaid buy-in process, then what we're going to do is we're going to add up all the premiums that they've paid and also subtract it from that amount as well. After all of those things have been completed, then at that point in time, Medicaid can ask for funds. So the way that the hierarchy for a stable account goes is that, all of these protections are followed. So end of life expenses are number one. Number two is if Medicaid is asking for anything. And then number three, any of the remaining funds would be dictated by what is stated in the will. Again, if there is one as well. There is a cost to have a stable account. It's $2.50 a month, or $30 a year. Or if you're out of Ohio, it's $3.50. What I like about this number is that it's never going to go up. We operate as a not-for-profit so that the more account holders we enroll, the lower the cost can get for everybody. And then also there is an asset-based fee. This is just once per year, not monthly, once per year. And that takes place within the first week of January every year. So it's already taken place for 2021. And that is between 0.19% and 0.33%. So what you'll notice is that that's a sliding scale, that people can fall at those edges. They can also fall in between those. Well, that's a computer algorithm. It dictates whether somebody is investing, how much, what percentage of their, assets in a stable account are being invested. Did they see any earnings? There are so many different things that go into that. And the computer is much smarter than I am. But that's something to know, because even though it is 1 year and these fees are less than half of 1%, a fee is still a fee. So people need to be made aware of that as well. And then one of the last things I wanted to touch on is just how well a stable account works with other financial accounts. And a special needs trust, or even a third-party discretionary trust, is a perfect example of this, because many of the cons to a stable account such as only being able to have $15,000 per year, or, the funds can be, are susceptible to Medicaid, are fixed by a third-party discretionary trust. And some of the cons of trusts to where, they can be more costly at times, or sometimes the funds aren't as easy to access. Again, that depends, but those are things that stable accounts can fix as well. Using them together is amazing. We've seen a lot of great testimonials from people that are utilizing both. The way that I kind of look at all of these financial options for people, even if it's a checking account, a trust, a stable account, you name it, these are all tools in the toolbox. The more tools you have, the more things you can build. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to touch on is this is our customer service team, and this is the best way to get a hold of our team as well. So we have a 1-800 number. A couple things to note about that is that you actually get somebody else on the other line, which is fantastic. It's not press 1 for this, press 2 for that. And for us on the East Coast, it's even better because it's open till 8 o'clock. Since we serve people on, all the way on the West Coast, we want to make sure that the lines are at least open until 5 for those folks on the West Coast. We have an email for, those that would prefer to email, or, your brain thinks of something at midnight. It happens to everybody. And then again, our website is where everything is done. So I'm going to take you all back to our website because, again, this is where everything's done. Enrolling, making sure that the account is maintained, applying for the stable card, even just getting in contact with us. Everything can be done through the website. And then so, again, thank you all. I really appreciate you being here on a weeknight, 7:30 at night. It means a lot to me. I greatly appreciate for Jody for having me as well. And Dave for listening to me talk for 45 minutes for an hour. But, I know that he and I are able to field questions now as well. So fire away, please.
So if anybody is wanting to ask a question, you have to unmute yourself. Or maybe I can do it for you. I don't think I can. There was a question that came into the chat box a little bit earlier. I'm not sure if everybody saw it. It said, did you say, and this was directed to Dave, when the father retires, the disabled child who is receiving SSI now receives SSDI at the level of 50% of the father's Social Security amount? And if so, is that done automatically, or do we have to apply for it somehow? So Dave, you did provide an answer there.
Yeah, so the answer is yes to that question. It happens, it's 50% when parent retires, as long as child was disabled prior to the age of 22. And when I say it should happen automatically in quotes, it should happen automatically. When Social Security processes dad's retirement, the system should catch that there's a disabled adult child in the system, and that should switch over. But I've seen it in many, many cases, particularly over the past 18 months, where that's not happening automatically, and people have had to contact the Social Security Administration to get that switch flipped, essentially. And so, again, I think the knowledge of just knowing what should happen when it should happen is important, because if you miss that for a period of time, you probably get back pay, but you've left a lot of time and opportunity on the table there.
And then just to kind of reiterate, when you say remind the SSA upon application, that's Social Security Administration, not Service and Support Administration. I don't know why we can't have a different acronym.
Too many letters, too many acronyms. Yep. So.
Anybody else have another question? You can do it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up.
Well, Nick, it seems like we did a fantastic job. No questions.
You
Just talk the questions right out of them. So.
Again, and I'm going to let everybody or remind everybody that we will have this presentation posted. So if you do decide you have a question and you want to go back and just kind of revisit the presentation, you can do that. We will send a Facebook post out to let you know when that is up and ready to view. And with that, we'll have the actual PDF versions of the PowerPoints. So that's something that all right, guys,
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's always wonderful working with the two of you.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you,
opportunity.
Jody.
If nobody else has any other comments, everybody have a great night.
You too. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.